Hello, everyone. Today I want to talk about a 1980 movie, and this is Heaven's Gate. A very famous, some say infamous movie, directed by Michael Cimino. Even on the cover, it's called Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate, starring Kris Kristofferson, Christopher Walken, Isabelle Huppert, and a whole bunch of very familiar actors from the 80s, some making their, some in the early parts of their career, Mickey Rourke, Jeff Bridges. There's really he's probably the main supporting actor in the film. It's a tough film to talk about. I'm not very good at thinking that I'm going to add anything to a film as famous or as infamous as Heaven's Gate, but I have some thoughts about it, and I thought, what the heck, I'll give it a shot. And I'm going to start out with a book that I recently reread, and this is Final Cut, Dreams and Disaster in the Making of Heaven's Gate by Stephen Bach. And this was Stephen Bach was head of production at United Artists, who produced Heaven's Gate. Heaven's Gate is attributed for the falling apart of United Artists, and it's a story that is just incredible. It's a suspense story in which United Artists, which went back to silent film days, and Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks Sr. Started as a company that would distribute films of their own, plus other films, and it would be more or less an artist studio. And it pretty much kept to that. They weren't actually a studio, United Artists. They didn't have any grounds. They would have to, any physical studio, they would have to rent studios from sound stages from other studios. And they didn't really produce the films in the sense. There was always, they were almost like independent productions. They would come to United Artists. United Artists would have a certain amount of say, certainly on the budget, and also on the casting. But they pretty much let directors alone. Heaven's Gate came to them with a budget of $8 million. It soon increased to $11 million. In the accounting department, United Artists, they had probably the foremost authority in what films are going to cost. It's one thing to have a budget, and it's another thing to what that budget's actually going to turn out to be. He said that Cimino's budget was smoke and mirrors. After reading the script, that it would cost at least $15 million, or more than $15 million, probably more in the 20s, and maybe even higher than that. At the end of the day, Heaven's Gate came in at about $40 million, which is about $120 million in today's money. It was a very, very expensive movie. And Cimino had just won the Academy Award, Best Director, Best Film for The Deer Hunter. United Artists had always been trying to lure David Lean to finance and distribute a David Lean movie. They thought they would have a David Lean Western in Cimino's project. Cimino had the same kind of pictorial eye as David Lean had. But the film quickly ran out of control. It was a runaway project. United Artists pretty much acceded to everything that Cimino wanted, even though Cimino seemed to be, at least according to Stephen Bach's books, non-communicator. You couldn't even communicate him. He just did more and more and spent more and more money, and United Artists had to keep picking up the bill. They were filming it in Montana, Idaho, and Glacier National Park was one of the locations. So they were far away, and when they sent emissaries, Cimino just ignored them and had his producer, Joanne Corelli, talk to them. And there was just, until nearly at the end, when United Artists said that they were going to fire him, that he started to work faster. He was filming tremendous amounts of film, And the first cut he showed United Artists was over 5 hours long. He had contracted for no more than a 3-hour movie, and he had gone way over the time. There was so much film they could never edit it in time for their original release dates. And finally, he got it down to about a 3-hour, I guess it was about 3-hour and 20-minute movie. There was already rumors. United Artists was in utter turmoil. The movie had become an albatross. It was demoralizing for the whole company. And word was out that the movie would be a disaster. Even before it premiered, Variety gave it a thumbs down in the commercial aspects of the movie. And then when it opened in New York City, it probably got the most devastatingly negative reviews any movie has ever gotten. And it was really surprising to everybody. They thought it would probably not get good reviews because they themselves thought the movie was pretty much incomprehensible. But I don't think they expected the vitriol to be that bad. And after a week, according to Stephen Bach's book, Cimino said, "Let's just pull it. I'll work on it. Give me another 4 months," I think he wanted, "and we'll edit something that will be more, might actually have some commercial appeal." Why were the critics so hostile to this movie? They had praised The Deer Hunter, most of them. Most of the critics that praised The Deer Hunter were exactly the opposite for Heaven's Gate. In the time period after The Deer Hunter came out, a lot of critics saw it as a right-wing movie. It was racist as far as the Russian roulette scenes. The Asians were presented in a racist view. So now, maybe even Cimino was influenced by that because now he's making a left-wing movie. But the way he overdoes everything, mostly I think it was the incomprehensibility of the plot, of the storyline. It was all a beautiful-looking movie that had no storyline that any audience would ever appeal to any kind of mass audience to recoup its $40 million budget. And in the end, it only recouped about $3 million. So it's one of the biggest box office disasters of all time. It did get released again in a few years, I think around 84, 85, in the original version. It got better reviewed at that time. It got good reviews in England and in France, and especially the French said, these American critics are gauche. They don't know a work of art if it hit them on the head. But despite all that, it didn't do any business in those countries either. But in the course of time, and it was also edited down to a version that was a little over 2 hours, I think, called the Johnson County War. And that didn't do any business either, where he cut out a lot of the lyrical bloat, I guess you would say, of the movie, and got down to the basics of the action of the movie. And there is some considerable action in the movie. And Stephen Bach, who was the head of production, he was actually co-head when the movie went into production, but he and his partner as production head, they approved the project, and United Artists was owned by Transamerica, who's kept out of what budget you gave a movie or what movies you make. They had owned it as a conglomerate. They owned it as a prestige part of the company that they thought would enhance their stock value, which never happened even before Heaven's Gate. They saw it as, well, what is this company doing for us? It's not doing anything. But it did have prestige, United Artists, from its decades and it owned the James Bond franchise, the Rocky franchise. It also had another runaway production, which was Apocalypse Now, and which was way over budget. And at the time that Heaven's Gate was being filmed, Coppola was still he spent, I think, 2 years editing a very expensive film, although when that film was released, Apocalypse Now, it did get good reviews and good business. So United Artists wasn't nearly in as in a big a disaster as it seemed to be, but the prestige value had gone way down, so Transamerica sold it to MGM Studios, and mostly MGM wanted it for some of its, for the franchises, but also for its distribution center, because that's what United Artists was probably the best at, a worldwide distribution. They knew how to, distribution system that knew how to sell films. And part of the book that's so fascinating is when the distributors, the people in charge of the distribution of it saw that they had no idea how to, no one could understand the film or what appeal it might have for audiences. And Stephen Bach himself, he got out, everybody in United Artists were in the top positions, were all fired. Bach stayed around for the 4-month editing process. He actually oversaw it with, and the editor being used, William Reynolds. He was a legendary Hollywood editor, and he did his best to try to make it in United Artists, Stephen Bach's view, somewhat comprehensible for audiences. And Bach left the film business. He wrote biographies. He was very cultured. He knew film history, like an encyclopedia. He wrote biographies of Leni Riefenstahl, of Marlene Dietrich, very well-received biographies. There's also a film, a documentary made from this book. It came out, I think, in 2004. Michael Cimino, I don't think that was only in it archivally, but Jeff Bridges, I think, comments on it. I haven't seen the movie since it originally came out, and I haven't been able to track it down. If it's streaming anywhere, I don't know. But that's all the studio side of the film. But now let's look at the actual film just for a few minutes. I don't have anything profound to add to what's been written about this film in the past. But I will say, in watching this recently, and I saw it. I saw the Johnson County War. I'm not sure when I saw it. I think I saw it in the first week in New York City. I was seeing so many movies in 1980. But I believe I saw it in New York City in 1980. I certainly saw this original cut when it came out, when it was re-released, the original cut in 84, 85. And I've seen it, I believe I saw it on DVD as well. And I will have to say that this Criterion releases looks absolutely fantastic. And really, this is one of the greatest looking movies you're ever likely to see. The cinematography was by Vilmos Zsigmond. It's really probably his masterpiece. I don't know if it's a masterpiece on the level of Michael Cimino, but it's certainly a masterpiece on the level of. I think that may be undeniable. The scenic, the lighting and the interiors, the scenic beauty of the exteriors, it's absolutely fantastic. One might quibble that maybe it's too good, that you get wore out from it. I know the United Artists executives who saw the 5-hour version, they could hardly even move. It was so, it just drains you of, beautiful shot after beautiful shot after beautiful shot. But if you take it, it was originally shown with an intermission. I did the intermission. I did actually a day-long intermission. I saw about the first hour and a half and the second hour and a half the next day. Which works because dramatically there isn't a whole lot going on in the movie, as far as the drama goes. But I think the other aspect of the movie that makes it a masterpiece of costumes. I mean, the costumes are the period detail, and it was all authentic. The way people looked, it was everybody's costume came from photographs, pictures. That was by Alan Heifel, and of the costuming is the hats. I mean, I was just entranced by it. I tried to see, is there another hat like this hat? I know there was almost like 1,000 different kind of hats, because I guess, I don't know how many extras it had, but I've never seen a movie with so many extras that are so jam-packed. But the hat like that Kristofferson wears and that Christopher Walken wears, it's just amazing. But even the hats on the women in the sequence in the prologue that's supposed to be at Harvard, actually filmed in London at Oxford. And then there's the music score. Now, originally John Williams was supposed to do the music score, and I wonder what the film would have been like with a John Williams music score. But he had been chosen to head Boston Pops, and he said, "Sorry, Michael, I can't. This is a lifetime dream job." So what Cimino did was he used David Mansfield, who was a well-known session-type musician. He had toured with Bob Dylan. T-Bone Burnett is in it, and they formed a group, and he was given a small studio to come up with all kinds of different sort of Cajun-influenced folk music, mostly on the fiddle, mostly string instruments, and the music score is fantastic. But I have to say that the storyline, the narrative is weak by any stretch of the imagination. I think, and Cimino would really. I'm not sure that Cimino in any of his movies. Now I haven't seen. He made 4 other movies after the disaster of Heaven's Gate, and he was devastated by the response to Heaven's Gate. He genuinely thought he was a great artist, and he had made a great masterpiece, and nobody was appreciating it, at least in the United States. And I think what Cimino really needed was a screenwriter to try to tie some of this. It's such a simple story, and it's a story that's been told so many times. There's nothing original whatsoever. You have a love triangle. You have best friends falling apart over both of them being in love with the same woman. You have the homesteaders versus the cattle barons. And there's nothing new even in the politics of the movie. I mean, movies in the reactionary 1950s were not sympathetic to the cattle barons. They were always more sympathetic to the homesteaders. And it has the political aspect of it, the class aspect of it is very overstated in the movie. So the structure, there's no structure. You don't even know that Kristofferson and Christopher Walken are best friends till about half the movie is over. But then there's the performances. And the performances are, Kristofferson really looked the part, and as I said, he had a great hat. Christopher Walken is really good. Walken had worked with Cimino on The Deer Hunter. He's if you're a Christopher Walken completist, and I know there's many of you out there, you have to have Heaven's Gate in your collection. But the funny and ironic part of it, when United Artists, which did have it did have some veto power over casting, at least the major parts, and they heard Cimino wanted Isabelle Huppert, was unknown and she was early in her career. And that was, can she speak English? The word through the grapevine was you're never going to be able to understand her. So they talked to her. Stephen Bach talked to her on the telephone and couldn't understand a word she was saying. So they flew to London, where Cimino was meeting with them, and to try to get them to approve Huppert. And they were so unimpressed with her, but they agreed, as they did. I mean, you can't say that United Artists ever, I don't think Cimino could say that United Artists didn't give him just about everything he wanted, money-wise, casting-wise. So they agreed to it. The irony, as Stephen Bach mentions in the book, because he was against the casting of Isabelle Huppert, is that she's spectacular in the movie. And when I was watching this, I thought, boy, she's the best. She gives the best performance in the movie. She's just, she's a real actress, and she really is so involved in the movie. It's so physical, and it's a tremendous performance. So those are my thoughts on the movie. Of course, it's a very it's a movie that some people love, think it's a great work of art. If you're so inclined, I would Google on Robin Wood's writings on Heaven's Gate. He thought it was a masterpiece from the beginning, and when it was later released, also wrote. He's one of the greatest film critics of all time. I was unconvinced. He saw it more or less as a Marxist movie, and even he saw the what I see and most people see as a rather structureless, dramatic movie. He saw that as being revolutionary, and it's I can see his point. I just found some of it story-wise. I found some of it sadly lacking and almost amateurish. But it does have a certain sadness to it, because this film, and I saw almost every movie that came out in 1980. I was a film fanatic, and this was far and away not the worst movie in 1980. I mean, there were so many worse movies, and I was impressed from the first time I saw it. I mean, to see this movie in a movie theater on a big screen it's just one of the most gorgeous things you're ever going to see. I mean, it's like watching paintings fly by. Now, and as far as the final cut goes, I think that, I highly recommend it, because it's one of the greatest books ever written about how a film is made from the studio side of the story. And I don't know whether you should read it first or I'd probably see the movie first, but if you read the book first, I can't see how you could possibly pass up seeing the movie. And the movie also, it's important, that movie too, because it was the end of the auteur, the vision of the auteur, the vision of having a studio allowing a director to do whatever he wanted to do to encourage him in his vision. That'll never happen again. There will never be a movie like Heaven's Gate on many different levels. And runaway projects are impossible now. I mean, the suits are all over the place. But also because there's no special effects in Heaven's Gate. I mean, this was all real. All these extras, they were real people. And all the action in the movie, all the scenic, there was no, there was nothing added afterwards. Everything that you see was actually what was filmed. And again, in the computer graphics era, that'll never happen again. It would be so expensive today, it wouldn't even be considered. So then we have the extras on Heaven's Gate, and there's a conversation that was recorded for the release of this Criterion, and it's pretty good, between Michael Cimino and Joanne Corelli as producer, and he talks about the film. Neither of them mention, I think Joanne Corelli does mention towards the end that, how devastated Cimino was, and who wouldn't be, to get the worst notices of any movie ever made, perhaps. But he talks about his dedication to the movie, and there's no doubt that his actors and the crew member, they worshipped him, they loved him, they really. Kristofferson says, and there's also the next supplement is an interview at the time of the Criterion release, where how proud he was. He felt like he was in a painting, how dedicated everybody was to Cimino's vision. And Stephen Bach, too, in his book, says that he has no doubt that, Cimino wasn't trying to make a movie that was going to be a disaster, a commercial disaster, to the point where it would be so ridiculed that it would bring United Artists to its knees, or being sold and basically forgotten as a studio involved, or as it emerges into MGM. Then we have a interview, the Kristofferson interview, very good, and then with David Mansfield, and he did the score that I've already talked about. That is just outstanding. And then we have a really good interview with Michael Stevenson. He was the second assistant director, and on a movie like this, the assistant directors had tremendous amount of responsibility. It was such a huge project. Stevenson was a veteran. He had worked, he said, with David Lean, Anthony Mann, Stanley Kubrick. He knew what it was like, a harsh taskmaster with a very precise vision, the way Cimino has, the attention to detail. one of the great experiences. And evidently everybody who worked on this film, you know, outside of the United Artists corporate offices, they just loved making this movie, and it was a tremendous hardship movie to make. And then we have a very nice booklet with some great still photographs from the movie, and it includes a article, an essay, and that is by Julia Diagno Valan. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong, and she loved the movie from the beginning and appreciated it. And one of those in Europe, you know, that what's wrong with these Americans? How can't they see the masterpiece that Heaven's Gate is? And then we have another interview with Cimino in the booklet, and this is a interview before the film actually was released. So it's all on the technical aspects, the great challenges that they faced, and I just want to show a couple more shots. Kurosawa, John Ford kind of shot of the horizon, and then the sense of the extras, and every shot where there's and these are the immigrants. This is a war against the immigrants, the Johnson County War, the cattle barons versus the immigrants. You know, it's a movie. It's a great movie. I wish the only quibble I have with Heaven's Gate, the Criterion edition of Heaven's Gate, is that it does not cover anything of the movie that makes it so famous. And perhaps because this is Michael Cimino's definitive cut, and he says on this interview in the supplements that this is it. This is what he wanted. This is the full version. I don't think it's much different than the original version. He just ran out of time. I think he just tinkered with some things, so it pretty much is the original version. And maybe Cimino didn't want an edition that covers his profligate spending in order to achieve that vision. But he sounds proud of it, and that's good, because he really didn't deserve all this vitriol, as I said before. And he only made 4 more movies, so he only made 7 movies in total. I've only seen Year of the Dragon and Desperate Hours. I thought both of those were very, very good, very interesting. Again, sort of narratively challenged, perhaps, and perhaps Year of the Dragon also had some accusations of racism against the Asian characters in the movie. But I have an urge to see them, see what was Cimino really on about narratively, because I didn't get a real sense of that here. And you see the bonding, the male bonding that also was in the De Niro Walken characters in Deer Hunter, and the Walken Kris Kristofferson relationship here. But outside of that quibble, and that's why I talked about Final Cut, because it's such an interesting story all around. And I think the story of its production, its runaway production, and its reception by the critics in the United States and by audiences is really intertwined to make the film in a historical context one of the most fascinating movies ever made. Okay, so that's it. I went on much longer than I thought I would. I was hesitant to take a stab at Heaven's Gate, but I thought, as I said in the beginning, what the heck, I'll give a shot. Thanks as always for everybody who stuck with me to the end. It's well appreciated. Any comments on Heaven's Gate, I'd love to read them. And if not, take care, and I'll catch you next time.